Hi, I'm Charles Alexander, founder, director of Chax Press. I think we've been presenting poetry readings for 30 years, off and on, most recently on a kind of an ad hoc basis, and trying to present more of the authors we're publishing, like these three here today, who have either a recent book, as in the case of Michael Gottlieb, or forthcoming books, as in the case of Tom Mandel and Beth Joslow. So stay tuned for those. I'm going to take up very little of your time here. I think the authors are very well known to all of you, and they certainly have probably more years together publishing poetry than they would like me to count. So I'm not going to count those. I know I've known, I think, all of them for 20 years, more than 20 years, 30 years in some cases, more than 30 years. And it is absolutely wonderful to host them here. I was listening yesterday to the radio while driving, and there was a young man from this was a local public radio station. There was a young man from South Tucson, which can be a rather difficult part of the community here in some ways, and also a very wonderful part. And he had started a vegetable and flower kind of growing area, and had support to do that in an area that didn't have anything like that didn't even have much opportunity, at least at the time this began, to start fresh food. But I was struck as soon as I turned the radio on, what I heard him say was, we had a responsibility to make something that was beautiful. And that just, that got me into that conversation right there. And I thought, well, poets know something about that too. The responsibility to make something beautiful, whether it's, syllables juxtaposed in beauty, a definition of poetry we understand, or that ever curious nexus of beauty and truth that Keats spoke about. And I think each of the three poets here this afternoon have really tried, whether they were always conscious of it at the time, to make something beautiful, both in the sense of the poem they might be working on, but also in the sense of an investigation over lifetimes of what this connective tissue of language and poetry is, what it requires of us, what it allows us, what is difficult about it, what is illuminating about it. And I know they have all, in their ways, made my reading and understanding not only of poetry, but of the meaning of what it is to be here, human, doing poetry, more beautiful, as well as more enlightening. And I, maybe more than anything, just want to thank them for that. And so I'm just going to go on to the reading from here, and we're going to start with Michael Gottlieb. Rachel Blau DuPlessis will be second, and Tom Mandel will be third. We're not going to take a break. We're kind of just going to, whatever the Zoom version is of passing the microphone is what we're doing. And so sit tight, and we will allow questions at the end. There are about as many people here as we've ever had for a reading, and there should even be more coming in as we start. So it's not going to be the kind of situation we're going to suddenly unmute everyone. When at the end, when we have a conversation, we'll ask you to raise your hand in that Zoom way by using that reactions menu at the bottom, and then we'll be able to call on you. But for the next, 60 to 70 minutes, let's just hear what this particular beauty, knowing it is a complex and difficult substance, what it is. Thank you, and welcome, Michael Gottlieb.
Thank you, Charles. I'm going to be reading from this book that Charles just brought out. Sorry, it's glaring. Selected poems. And a lot of what I've been, just to pick up on a point you made, Charles, a lot of what I've been working on, writing about, thinking about all of these years is just what you touched on about the doing, right? The doing of poetry. And I think some of the things I picked out of this book, which is 5 decades worth of poems, speaks to that. I also want to say how thrilled I am to be reading with Rachel and Tom, and what a treat it is. And also I want to say thank you for letting me go first, Tom and Rachel, because as we all know, in the world of Zoom poetry, first is the new last, and last is the new first. So it's very generous of you, especially you, Tom, to let me go first. So I'm going to sort of pick and choose from the decades here. And I start from a book published about 40 years ago, 35 years ago, Jeff Young did, called New York. A poem called The Great Pavement. He often told me that he preferred to avoid presenting his friends, his literary friends, that is, with the opportunity to read his work before it was published. In this context, he gave free rein, to me at least, to the suspicion that he was coming across phrases and not infrequently entire lines of his in his friend's writing. Eventually, though, he grew to recognize how misplaced was such a concern. Now, he confided recently, he strives to keep them knowing from what he is reading. And a few years later, Peter Gannick published a book called The River Road, which this comes from. When I told my parents what I wanted to be, my father threw the classified section at me. Show me where it says help wanted poet. And then about 21 years ago, James Sherry published a book called Gorgeous Plunge of mine. And this is from that book. What doesn't kill us makes us weaker. Across the sky, missing man formation. Like that untoward ardor for precedence, that way of styling oneself, those illiberal disaffections, all speaking so poorly for our powers of abeyance, inference, investiture, endurance. In this lattice of derision, a ragtag, nattered remainder, a calumnied, unweighted, they are waiting here, the company entire. That is not really us, we say. Just because it's in my car doesn't mean it's mine. The unnumbered lots, the waste plot, the stringently incurious applying the Barmecide, applying the drubbing anew, the whirling disease. Not enough, never nearly enough of the merry men, past masters. They were here just a minute ago. This can kill you too, just as easily. Too much poetry. Poetry can be bad for your health. The ones dragged along, driven off, ridden to exhaustion, to distraction, to all ends, driven down, withering under the pitying exposure. Do not shake the appalling results. The old fashions, the Manhattans, the last of the Delawares, the trophies and the captives here on the northern branch, along with the fragiles and the rushes and the ground rapes. Raised, that is organized, fully subscribed, like a hopeful fated regiment at first sight, at first publication. Point away from face and other people while opening. We become our lists. It's another section from this book. The people have not spoken. They have nothing to say. Or perhaps they're too busy to get back to us. Likewise, we must be alive to the suggestion that he is in fact dead, or should be, by all rights. The one time he was one with the world was when he was doing the one thing the world could have cared less about. It's what makes us no good for anything else. Chance has nothing whatsoever to do with it, with these sallow, coruscating, sheepishly bilious delectations. The funhouse mirror, the guttering lamp. Here's looking like you. A wail of obeisance rises from the dark. We hear it in the swelling. The problem with only liking that and those who like you back. Brutishness, for example, as a beard for something far worse. The inattentive thief, the saintly actuary, the altruistic scavenger, the vexed, the ulcerative, the shadow dominion. This is what waits for us. If you keep scratching it, it will bleed. This is the grove. This is the glade. This is the place where they took the best part of us away. In the same way that for every buyer, there must a seller be. You cannot rise without my falling. And so, when you go to sleep, you will see me holding your hand. And then the poem from that book is called, another poem, The Man-Shaped Shadow. My opposite number, lopping limbs as he nears. New, like new, almost new, better than new. In the lost precincts of the poet's wildlife management. A skill set, a family fabric, a title case. The ingredients, most of them available at any hardware store. As the doors slide back into their pockets, an excited utterance. I don't know what I like, but I know I don't like you. A sampler for disaster. And a few years later, it's okay, I hope to narrate it like this. James Sherry did another book of mine called Lost and Found that had this poem about 9/11 called The Dust in it, as well as this long poem called Issue of Error that read a section from 2 sections, maybe. By popular acclaim, one of us has been elected outlier for life. On our chosen path, making a puissant approach, hexing the prey. Our passage tangled in our own discomforts. All of us so greatly relieved by the backdated morning. We've come to believe that despite the prop wash, we'd apparently escaped quite nearly unmussed. So we had no trouble shorting what was ever left of our residual, demissable, dry-eyed pudor, leaving us entirely disarmed in the face of just this sort of eventuality. That is, ourselves showing up. 7. This is low. This is beneath you. The way we are obliged to straighten, bind, foreshorten, degrade. Yet another soon to be regretted landfall. That which keeps getting snared in the works, its tail growing longer, famously alighting, returning inevitably to a place where the walls themselves are furred with what is left of what even you say is unworthy of you. How much more terrible must it be below? In the very same way, so many of us end up saying, the proper study of mankind is me. In 2013, this book called Dear All came out. Michael Scharf published. This poem was in it, called 7 Against Themes is the title of this book, of this poem. An ill-gotten loss, a high functioning, because there is no one else who can walk with you down this road. It is a love that dare not speak its middle name. The very name makes markets, making the perfect the enemy of the good and plenty. You don't. And these last poems are from a book called Mostly Clearing, which came out in the before times 2 years ago. So surely, as if there could be any doubt any longer, the realization dawns, this was mostly tidal air. That end of days, as heralded by Caspar David Friedrich, that long view across the lake rising above the sheet of mist, we want to say has now run its course. Now cured, one and all, those diseases of despair. With the warmest of regards, you showed them the dummy. Among all that we have been faced with today, there are some things we are resolved must be true. This was our life laid out before us, a surprisingly sunny sizzle reel, In the glow of the burnished bright work, we made out our reflection. At the end of the day, the unavoidable realization that we too, even us, might be counted among the saved. Doctor, I can walk again. It simply can't be beat. I remember your apgar, becoming what we hold most dear. Breathing, incorrigible, irrepressible. I embarrassed you, that's my job. I took your picture. Do you want it back? I hold this in my hand. We called it a transparency. Of a morning, now that you mention it. What possibly could fall out of this clear blue sky? A Dagwood sandwich? A not unwelcome anvil? A bank error in your favor? A burnished apple? A long lost friend? Almost anything. Shelley's Great Wheel. We pass along the fiery road, a kind of set list stapled to the articles of faith. The green shoots too. A salubrious uptick, a scenic overlook, an unspooling hinterland, a push-in of hopefulness, pouring us into these casts. We know if there is no deposit, maybe there is no return. Not heedless, but regardless. To be so lucky, to grow old, to be so lucky to grow old enough to someday be surprised by this. What I now feel obliged to stipulate to, what you always saw through, those blessed impure thoughts. After all these years admitting no longer a stranger to this emotion, like a lifer miraculously sprung from solitary, how much I need you. That object permanent so devotedly wished for, turning it over in your hand. Ask a woman who knows. For so long starring in my own biopic. Usually we put this over there and there it stays. With that part of me which you gave back to me. I try it on for size. If it doesn't fit now, maybe I will grow into it. Where the poets take the waters. Where the poets take the waters, asking nicely for a fight. blasé fatigue, the doofus stand in the equivalent of a mere needle stick, the dry goods. I can't imagine anywhere I'd rather be today. What we all naturally have a hankering for, such blithe assurance. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Without apparent volition, they ring down from the lookout. The sally gate, the happy accident, the cracking mask of resolve, what is laid on with a trowel. Among the plantings of the towering folly, all the things you don't need to be ashamed of anymore. Standing at what we assume was a safe distance, surveying the so-called love nest, it was finally clear, even to intelligences such as ours, of a piece, price unconscious, drawn easily on this topic, what inevitably takes a lifetime to master. What is our highest calling? An untenanted allotment to which we bring our joint and several fortunes, a current coursing through the crowd, a caravanserai for our hopes, a victory at sea. Everyone has the goods on us. In the lighting district, the gift district, the notions district, where we learned free verse isn't free. Doing business in the beating heart of the city. Under our own buttonwood tree. This is our practice. The pitch where we fetch up, making our markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Wow, we're just going to move right on to Rachel. Blau DuPlessis.
Okay. I'd like to thank my fellow readers for the pleasures of reading in their company. And thanks to the intrepid publishers of the various books that we'll all probably be reading from. I like that Michael did that, including forthcomingly Chax, my selected poems. Yay. I'm going to open this reading with two sounds or modes. The first poem is dedicated within this reading to Charles Alexander, who is all that and more. He liked this poem well enough to make a broadside of it about a decade ago. From the book Interstices, I never know quite how to do this right, which is the first book that I published after Drafts, published by Sub Press. Ledger 11. Plan. Take a book and soak in water down to pulp. Result. A loosening grip on the discourses. Plan. Here could write between the lines the things unsaid, a text within the text. Result. Blue paradox goods of raven rose, magenta, canopic crypts within the sentenced word. Plan. Override those claims of illegible dots. Result. Stintless stars. Plan. Stack languages, translating from one to another. Result. Parallels between knowledge and mystery. Question. Does the sentence have a final wish? No. The cleft radiates luminosity. Complete is never complete. The second introductory sound is also a theme or thematic motif for me, and this theme recurs throughout Draft and elsewhere. here it appears in the first little teeny stanza of the poem, Incomplete Enlightenment, which is in the book Late Work from, it's like, I have no idea what, it's such a weird thing to do. If you ever try it, just try sticking a book up in the, which is available now from Black Square Editions. Incomplete Enlightenment 1. The knife was raised before there was an after. He cried out, "Stop, stop. My name means laughter." But, darling boy, no one said that laughter comes only from joy. It could be bitter, sardonic, dry, a snort of knowing irony before the drop was the reply. After those introductory sounds, I'm going to read 2 poems from Poetic Realism. These are, we know they're my collages on the cover, so we don't have to say that. It's been published by Blaze Vox and available. Poetic Realism is not just title, it's an attitude. So the book is filled with genres, some of them odd, some of them regular genres of poetry. A nocturne, a prologue. But these are somewhat odder genres. On the Border, eyewitness account. On the border, people are waiting, loitering. No luck. No luck in the tunnel between countries. In the tunnel between the countries might be lurkers counting darkness where and when they try to access hopeless process. Dark electricity in the train tunnel on the border pulses. The train is a needle knife of light. In the station on the border, someone wrapped in his belongings, layered blankets held around him, tied the stuff together with him, wedged tight, a bundle organized not to notice, and stuck himself layered, bundled, as if a shadow between the wall and corner. The door to the tracks had been propped open. He is wedged at the wall, back toward the hinges, slumped. The open door will almost hide him. The heavy doors of travel, literal, even though they're made of solid glass. He is a roll of sleep and tired waiting, deliberately hiding, pretended hiding, quietly waiting, or only waiting hopelessly, stuck at the open door of access. At the border makes it clearer. Some groups over there, camped or stationed, clumps of them seem not to matter, never positioned on the same day as others, but in some disposable and cast off set of punctured minutes, bidding, biding, binding. There's a taciturn, grumbled undertone. Everyone's tensions hover mid-air. Everything was unintentional. Everything becomes an exception. Excuses reverberated at the border. Here to imagine someone sandy-eyed from the strain of remembering how he got here, eroded stories, how what is happening, what end, and where end, ghosts of the future naught emerge now as if hallucinatory magic. The multiple ichs, the tatty layers of blanketage, layers multiplied, it's itself, and it messes with you inside the hallucination of yourself, fake, not asleep, or barely sleep. Then come the men with dogs and jobs organized in shifts in the station, and then limp, liminality afloat and drown. Down passages in wine dark dawning air. Hiss, schist, switch, shibboleth, shock. Waiting in the station, the wake of waking in the station on the border. There are lots of borders, and that one happens to be between Italy and France. Ventimiglia and whatever the French town is. The second poem I'll read from this book is The Press, a Diagnosis. If any of you are medical doctors out there, it probably really can be read as a diagnosis. 1. I am a fleck, a stat, a barely thought, a so, trying to account for content, a contentment as text, icon. A space between the stratted self, the wink of skin, and found these veins doubly dubious, with vines and wires. A blotch had gotten woven in my angled strain, a living shape of wax and wane. Scribbled writing, scrabbled reading. It was some over-inky inner pen made dunks and blots, its tide too thick, whose swell impressed these stains up through my arm, a force incarnadine, the thing itself in caramel line, that inked me from the inside out, beginning with a blood slide, spills of spools, my dabbled spoils of time. These cellular portals each became a leaky little door or dictionary with its syllables colored by flood words underneath the skin, their local beat red, a swell of purple stuff imprinted just inside itself, in me. 2. Of course, it seemed that I was bleeding, but I'm not. I'm simply done, finished with holding it in, pressing it down inside under skin. It looked as if I deliberately exuded blotched bruises. They were, in truth, unreadable words to state every sentence ever writ had under sentences sucked back, unsaid. Yet unexpectedly, they chose to write itself, themselves, inside, a purple oeuvre shaped as mine. 3. It could be regarded as a piece of signage or a banner carried on me, waving through myself, my underside. For the writing sets alphabeting selves beyond oneself. My body published it. The statements bleed their carmine veininess in capillary letters. It could be seen as clusters of bruised blood published on me, headlines changing daily on my beige white skin. A vast wall of contemporary marks, traces that we're walking past, that are also mine. I became that wall. I show the bleeding wells up through our time. Okay, from a book of later drafts, Pitch, draft 77 through 95. It goes again the wrong way. Salt Publishing and still publish on demand. I'm going to read the middle section of a poem called Draft 95, Erg. Erg is a unit of work, a unit of measurement of work, and it's a longer section and takes a little explanation. The occasion of this section was the really bright idea and this impossible, completely nutty idea of a psychology student who was interested in creativity, to ask poets to record their creative choices as they were making them during the composition of a poem by recording an account of those choices and rationales for the choices into a microphone concealed in the pen that it was assumed that these poets were using. Meshugana is the Yiddish word for this idea. I'm sure it's contextualized and everybody understands. Think about it. I couldn't even. It was almost impossible to tell this person why that was completely nuts. Okay, there are two characters in this little drama with different personalities and interests, R and Pen. The second section of Erg. R. I hold the inside out of space just for a bit, and then it disappears. Pen. Talk to the mini mic inside this pen. Narrate how and why you choose. R. It's not a bad question. How do I choose? By which I mean sequentially, implying scroll unrolling open, told like that. No simultaneity, not recursive. To narrate it won't work. Decisions come instantaneously, a synaptic evaluative insouciance with a what the fuck flair, so it's impossible to spell out the how and where. Pen. That's almost impenetrable. Or, what about a block of matter presents itself so full right here, so like an intricately textured wall, that the rest of one's life is soon to be spent investigating its ins and outs, enthralled to that? Pen. I didn't think you had such a penchant for simile. Or, whatever's here is accident become complete by working it. It's pitching forward as we speak. You didn't see, but there's a lurch. You almost don't in time get off the bus, but then you did, stuck on the street, sweating or swearing, where you'd almost miss that bus and you were panting, quite a 10-block run. But now, all right, you're on. Pen. The Pentecost of every now breaks through the aura of what's here, made by the ever, never was of words, their curls and swirls and limpid quivering. Or, that's right, pen, huh? The intractable becomes attractive and then rejected. The solving for one element or another on a periodic table with imaginary numbers gives rise to awkward balance or unbalanced shim. Ergs of pulse and weight and tininess get adjusted again and again with watch repairer's delicacy of touch. A jewel, a nanojoule, a jewel of a choice, a plumpish jerk of a choice. Pen. So forget sequence and forget the bus, forget the wall, then they're pentamentos all. Or now instead try vast net woven on side, erg, with blood-wiped woof, warped proof, debris, deciding something amid drift and weft, strength in the torque, aggression in the turn, momentum in the saturated gaze behind the everything that's here. Someone mentioned the murderous relation of the elements. Pen. It was a man you met. Depend on it. That doesn't sound like you. Or murderous. You're right. I wouldn't use. Excites me as an indication of intensities. It's pure passion. The head faints inside its own undone, undoing, blacking out inside the vacuum of page, emptied and full. Pen. So, are specific words expendable? Or absolutely not. Words stabilize, but do not deny porosity. It's language swooning over you and through. You hold it tight. It's soft. It's hard. Transforms itself on entering you. Pen. Taken a step further, long poem is always an impending failure. After all, desire's intermittent. Or it will come again. Its purest pleasure. Endings, failures are not so hidden goals along the way. What would success look like in this case? That the patient would live? We write Pindaric all the time, looking for victory and working as we fall so as not to tempt the powers that entered from the first. We hope our heart ribs do not burst. Pen. This is self-serving, self-dramatizing, even self-penalizing, and rhymed. Try something more straightforward like, do you think of the reader when you write? Or, I'm thinking of you because you have intruded. You're asking the most exacerbating questions, except for those I ask myself. Pen. How do you link penetration and detachment? Or, I wish I could lose transcendence utterly. Pen, really? What a story. But it is both impossible and implausible. Pen, doesn't a grid suspend transcendence? Why not ask what I do to organize the overload? Dream of a pen. What are you doing here? Dream of an R. In the real, the same. Sometimes everything is magnetized, but not consistently. Pen. Poignant. Or go away. And the last thing I'll read, Zoom isn't quite right for the pen, but I think you got the general idea. I wanted to close with the last section of Angelus Novus in late work. The whole poem has 11 sections, and it is a midrash on the famous passage in a 1940 Walter Benjamin essay on the concept of history, or theses on the philosophy of history. There are two translations, with a passage very well known now on the angel of history. All right. 11. We live in nomadic unfulfillment. Therefore, I am the philologist of the trace, and I am not I. Hello. Goodbye. To read trace is violation. Not to read disvalidates whatever the mark might give. We stare at the plethora of texts. The trace is a smudge of flattened historical time, the sullying, hedged spaces, the hard-to-clean grease of endlessly bad politics. Ecologies fucked or challenged to breaking. Persons like numbers, but unnumbered, picking at shards thrown off by cataclysm, lying among those broken parts and speaking in the voices of the dead. So, speak. Nothing. Again, nothing. What is beyond that sublime? Something for which there is no genre, but swiveling pressures on words from words, blowing and blasted at every turn like mini angels. The time of now is palpable. It is the source. Tense and restless, twisted lot and cowed, is it possible to vow, to gather up our nothingness as force, to enter the dark tunnel of our time once more? Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thanks.
And now, Tom Mandel.
To see more of me lately that another might miss, or in case you did, my good old used to be routine may burst into flame soon over in the kitchen gadget aisle. So this time, be clever. It might be now or never. I'm going to read mostly from this new book, Letter to Poetry, but some from at least a couple of other manuscripts. And this one is from one called Simple Syrup, which collects poems that I'm choosing to call simple poems, sometimes folk poems, little songs, ditties, you name it. This is called Handle with Care. It's not quite as simple as some of them. Handle with Care. Let's have a show of handles. Place your handle on your heart. Play the handle you were dealt. Don't talk with your handles. On the other handle, when help is near at handle, no one seeks a handle out. But if you live handle to mouth, make few left-handled compliments. Give it the back of your handle. And when the moment is at handle for handle-to-handle combat, shake handles and come out fighting. As the second handle circles the hours, the moving handle, having writ, moves on. And those who sense the master's handle dub this the healing handle of time. No mere handle me down impulse to gratify the handles down winner or handle feed some man with a winning handle. No second handle nostrum scrawled in an unknown handle Employees must wash handles before returning to work. It's in the handles of God now. And if he has a question, he'll raise his handle. Keep your handles where I can see them. Keep your handles where I can see them. Cease your high-handled ways. Handles up the merchandise. Offer me a handle up instead. For we who do these handle springs may as well walk handle in handle. We are but a handle's breadth apart. You run your handle through my hair. I'm putty in the palm of your handle. These days, most of my handles-on work is actually done by my right-handle man. I've got to handle it to him. He's a steady handle on the tiller. Still, if only to keep my handle in, I made this prototype for you by handle. That's all the off-handle remarks for now. Handle me down my walking cane. Okay, folks, let's give him a big handle. Bitter, delicious, nouns display yearning, fire best seen in the sun, whose verb moves the real car you love. You spend lit up new each morning to stay in place, then take off at the same time, polishing, put out again each night until finally turning to a subject not left from the day before to read. I was absent that day. Old man, are you proud of years that science altered, belief itself pulled apart by grammar? Though difficult to locate, whatever page she recalls, we soon learn again, who do not cease expecting tomorrow. It, oil, always on our hands, which category brings it near, to see an arc again above her, a thought of her death, now long, dirt suspended in it, whom I liked so well, despite, is to know those years are gone, in Corvus, where Anselm cribs, like false quotes of the Buddha, that leave no residue on its wheel. If not for anyone, he said, she was on refrigerator magnets. We too are born as new, with gloves on when we drive. So she would have you think, again tomorrow, or we hope, what's left began today, all over the internet. No one that the sun really circles, pallidus. Each morning we are who was as the writing made her. What persons made them up may care for what was, what might have been, to bury itself in the horizon, then standing back, admire the work of a meditation teacher. His name is Chax, remains, appears and was truly cornfield and psychotherapist. His will not return tomorrow, constant, avid motion, sexual bon mot imagined from the Buddha's mouth. Adventurer also appeared as a child, born again. Of yesterday, nothing, how useless the remark. What to make of night, left as if to test one's patience. We do today what matters most. Jump in the car, drive our course, fervent for all that will not return. Time was invented to track the sun. I drop a penny in the cup of love. You heal the weak, you check the strong. And every time you part the throng to right what elsewise might go wrong or not, I nod, I go along. My left leg retreats as your right hand advances. I tumble into romantic trances. Calling you sister, though you're xenogene, one summoned from a place unseen to join two paths as in a dream, and never cease to echo your theme. The instant seemed that fecund. I caught your eye. I beckoned. I, who had thought to be no more than one, found you instead to dote upon. After Georges Perec, depressing these utopias that leave no room for chance, but sort all to an order difference won't abide. No habitation in taxonomy. For miscellanies, no grant, nor with all else in position, may any old thing slink back to its usual, any old place. There's just nowhere left to hide. Broken circle takedowns. These are all short, all short. Broken circle takedowns. When token circle breakdowns cause fault lines across cloud nine, your words begin to haunt me like last year's big idea recounted all wrong tomorrow. It's hard to live where one was happy once. Pavesi's words ring true, but do they matter? After all, No one lives anywhere nowadays, not even for a little while. I've said it many times. What irony would undermine, first it must assert. I started out to waste my time. Maybe now I have outlived it. Pavese, that's Cesare Pavese, very great post-war Italian novelist and poet. Greatest book of poetry, Lavorare Stanca, Work Wears You Out. Very highly recommended. Property of the state. This ends with a quote from the Amida. The harder the question, the longer you wait for an answer to put you in an altered state. You start out strong, then falter late. Your voice, first sweet, begins to grate. For the tenderest to tone in time must prate. As the voice of order and the forces of fate speak of joy and sorrow, you shift your weight. Your eyes lose focus, a response to gestate. You pray for tomorrow to obliterate whatever the instance fails to abate. Your back turns on praise, you'd rather berate. You want to blow the lid off this crate. Though you start out to hurry, in time, fate erases your schedule, it blanks your slate, rips tomorrow's halter, breaches its gate, so that once interrupted, you may learn to wait for past and future on a single date, on the day we crush the arrogant state. This one's a little longer, it's in a few parts. Not that one. Remember the Tune is called. While I sketch out extra decades I'll never need, you read this page of missing words each time you drive the perfect circle of my cage. Rattle my chain, upend my tomb, components ablaze upon the curve of God's cryptography. I believe I'll dust my broom. Every time I look backstage, history takes me back a page to where paralyzed conscience await revisions that never arrive. Polynomials rise and fall so fast, you're afraid to teach one thing about a dozen of the other. On the day that you return your last advanced decree, I believe I'll dust my broom. I play to win. I want to hear and instantly to care, unless, postponing our collapse, we meet tomorrow on the corner where folding your world inside my past, I believe I'll dust my broom. My interest mounts, then halts my pen before the paper's ruined again. I'll need some time to take back all the lies I'm done telling. Dogs may play me and subtle human craft works too, yet no replacement ever proves quite the needle for my groove. When cat and dog use cod and tag to sketch out all new standards, I believe I'll dust my broom. Missing at a moment's notice, I'm ready to get startled on a scale of 1 to 10, from none to when the middleman has breached our walls and put the pressure on. I'll always remember the tune. The dish ran away with the spoon. I believe I'll dust my broom. A margin that would tilt this plane, rend my chain, or track the lapse I swim to relax, must lapse past human scale. It's the original of you I want in my zoom. To reach my room outside the wire, you climb through bloom. You do not tire. Once we depart the womb, I believe I'll dust my broom. On our trip back to the border, I pointed out a troubled sieve you'd woven on the loom we left behind our first time through. Even a chain of stars that goes boom, someone chooses to discard. I have in mind to bet the farm, but not on that, nor buy it for that either. Before you change my mind, I believe I'll dust my broom. Once upon a time, an algorithm deep in the woods began to crawl the intellectual property that flourished unimplemented on the forest floor until at last it grew to be your signature. With much to tell before time fell, night passed quickly, then did not pass at all. Your patents are all painted out. I'm done with you. I believe I'll dust my broom. As if conversing with my thoughts, some feeble or strenuous other by magic might arise. I, for whom to live is to think, don't furnish my soul, but shape it. It's one thing to be lost, they say, to vanish another. The rarities I longed for once are useless now. My banished vocation has been revived. I believe I'll dust my broom. In that last section of the line, I, for whom to live is to think, don't furnish my soul, but shape it, is stolen from Montaigne. What matter does, doesn't, on, off, on, the sensor array touches palm to palm, while time looks away. There's nothing new to see. No one's left, but we who dance here hand to hand must turn the other cheek to cheek, as face to face we live from day to day. This is called Shaped All Ways. The grass dissolves beneath your feet. You cast your glance along the street. Shop signs start to rust. Minds compacted dust. You feel tomorrow's heat. Around the corner you retreat. To render the future just, the wind blows up a little gust. What strange triumphs follow defeat? The past is gone, it can't be beat. Spinoza taught you whom to trust, just like Sextus Empiricus. It's only you I want to meet. The last several poems have been from the new book, Letter to Poetry. This is from Simple Syrup, Death's Door. I gave Death's Door a try last week, but found it locked, happily. Since that, when, semi-consciously, I've kept an eye out for the key. Next time, I'm sure it'll be with me and turn the barrel easily. Tears of age. Through holes in the fabric of thought, I see this new line start where the last left off. Is it mine? Does it rhyme? Will it stop time on a dime? Or is it too terse, and to read it is a curse? 10 ohm. Everybody knows what an ohm is, right? You know, we know what an erg is. Rachel, we know what an ohm is, O-H-M. Wearing slippers after supper with your pillbox in my fingers, I walked the palace. It seemed so pallid, almost slapstick, silver plated like a pole vault in the slipstream. I saluted by mistake that day when on a break for a smoke, though way too busy, perhaps dreaming from my pillow. I asked all who passed my pillar, won't you hand me that resistor? I need to give it to my sister for her to carry home. It's clearly marked 10 ohm. To clean a potentiometer, turn to face its perimeter, then run it through a faucet, or else to use deoxit. Of a sports car, one main feature bears the name hydraulic clutch. It may be German or else Dutch. It may be sensitive for touch. Like those creatures once alive who we were quite sure knew so much about these and those and others such, all of which my sapience showed was no more than a crutch. Should you wonder where I'm heading with this sidebar on technology? Are we robots at a sewing bee? Our attention so diminished we cannot start until we're finished? Text me your query the next time you're free. Loose ends. Lately, it seems I spent a lot of time tightening loose ends on the ties that bind. While I listened to my friends describe the many ways our lives would surely improve if only I were willing to undo them instead. Despite what they say, there's not a lot of time in the universe. Mostly it's made out of space. We don't walk some narrow, unending corridor, but spend an explosive moment in this vast, light-filled place. I'm thinking of what Bill Burroughs said as he left for the hospital on the day he died. I'll be back in a minute, so stay right where you are. Scenes from a poet. That odd remark you made last night. I can't get it out of my head. That time might start to move real fast between now and when I'm dead. I like to keep my mind empty from the first down to the last, which is why I set this century. I want no visits from the past. They say thought can change the weather, but I don't believe I will. They say work and you'll feel better. I'd rather take a pill. Two more poems. The legend, this is from Simple Syrup. Simple poem. It's called A Little Legend of Glove and Hand. When glove lit out for parts unknown, hand was left alone to face a future that seemed bleak or strong might lead to weak. Hoping to find and lure glove home, hand set out to roam the land. But then one day, washing in a creek, hand ran into other hand. And with nothing more for hand to seek, now glove was on his own. Everybody know who Hank Williams was? He didn't live to see his 29th birthday. So this is a fake Hank Williams song. It's called Death's Dream. I remember the night you first flagged me down. You asked me to give you a ride into town. God poured the moonlight into your eyes. Then in your mouth, he put all those lies. When leaves filled the trees, I was all your delight. But the leaves began falling and you drifted from sight. Our love was a story you read to yourself, and closing its pages, looked back on the shelf. Though my soul burned, yours to discover, you told me to turn my face to another. Our love became a forgotten dream, drowned beneath time's vanishing stream. On the day you left without saying goodbye, the grass at my door turned as black as the sky. And now, as I wander down life's lonely way, I ponder why you chose to stray. Each time I feel winter's wind unfold, I ask, forsaken, do you lie in the cold? Or alone at a window with frost on the pane, do you long to be held in my arms again? As the moments tumble into death's daily whirl, do you wonder whether I'm still in this world? Will you one day make a phone dial twirl, spend another man's dime to tell me you're my girl? When the last day comes, as I fall to the ground, your voice I will hear. It will be my last sound. And on my stone will be these words. All you who walk where I lay in the sand, know that in death's dream, I still hold her hand. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a long time, if ever, that I've heard somebody read in what sometimes sounded like octosyllabic, sometimes decasyllabic rhyming couplets.
Those, but many of them have 11 syllables. It's all very carefully planned out. It's a kind of work I never in my life thought I would do, but which it pleases me to do because, for one thing, it's hard, fun, and you know how it is. It forces you to learn to say things you didn't know you had to say. Thanks.
But it also seems to enact something that's very very old in poetry, and that goes all the way back to Sidney's notion of writing poetry to delight in order to teach. And that's that is really wonderful, and I hear it in Rachel's work too, and I hear it in Michael's work. I think I'm going to ask Michael one question, and then they'll turn it open to questions by anybody.
Before you do that, let me say that I've like an idiot forgot to thank my fellow readers and old friends, both of you, and tell you what a great pleasure it was to read with you. And I hope that we spend centuries doing it. All of it.
The fields beyond time. Michael, there was a moment in one of your poems where you talked about what is deposited and what is returned. And it made me think there's a kind of interest almost in karma in your work, which is a kind of morality. And it seems like most of my life, people have been questioning whether morality should have anything at all to do with poetry. But I'm kind of glad to hear that. And actually, in some of all of your work, could you talk about your sense of morality in poetry? It's just a tiny question,
Yeah. I think in that piece, not to overstate it, we're fated to live this life of it, right? If we like it or not, we've made our bed and we're lying in it now. And how do we live this life that we've chosen? It was chosen for us. We find ourselves living. And that's been a consuming, persistent interest, question, dilemma for me. And as you know, because you published it not just in poems, but in essays and memoirs that I've written and published over the years. Yeah. And the dilemmas that we face trying to live this life and also have a life in this kind of world we live in. The choices that we make, choices we don't get to make. And I look I'm looking at the tiles and I'm looking at all these people that I've known for decades. And I know the choices that you've made and the ones that you want to, and you can't, we all have been living this life. Yeah. And I don't know, Bella, that I've done such a great job of capturing how hard that is, because you all are succeeding in your own way because you're still here. But that is, like I said before, consuming interest. Not that I have a choice about it myself, to me. And I think you accurately see it there in that poem and then, throughout the years. And everything else that you published in this book, Charles.
Well, if you want to ask a question, if you would use the raised hand function in the reactions, and I'll try to recognize you. And then I think once then you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Nancy has a question for Rachel in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat?
Yeah, I just saw it, and of course it disappeared. I think Nancy wanted to know
what was the name of the work by Benjamin?
All right. The name of the poem that I wrote is Angelus Novus, which is exactly what he calls the angel of history, the new angel. And it's in the book called Late Work. I now can't I don't think it's in selected poems. Until I see that table of contents, I'm now not sure what we did, but it's available from Black Square Editions, which is John Yao and others, a press. You can just Google Black Square or late work, and it ought to come up.
I think, Rachel.
Yeah.
I think the question was, what was the work? Also, maybe was what was the work?
The Benjamin work. Okay, was that the one? I don't want to.
The first volume, which, by the way, I did the bibliographical research on when I studied with Hannah Arendt.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay, it's the old translation is called Theses on the Philosophy of History, and there's a newer translation which I actually used the concept of history, and I just used it because the other one is so familiar. We almost know it by heart, which means we're almost not reading it when we see the passage. So I was really trying to pick it apart. Close reading, or whatever you want to say, explication du texte. And so I use the newer translation just as a curiosity. I quote the passage in the poem. Thanks for the question.
The reference is to a work. Come on.
Well, it's in Illuminations. I mean, the one that there's a book called Illuminations that it has the older translation in it. Tom, I think you're muted.
Am I muted?
No,
I don't know.
But there is, I mean, the Angel of History, he's referring to a Paul Klee work.
Yeah, it's a monoprint by Klee. I work through that. The monoprint is often, you can often see it in reproduction, but it's actually hanging in a museum in Israel, which is, unless you go to Israel, you won't see the original. It was given to Gershom Scholem, apparently, and he donated it to the museum. I describe the work in the poem sort of ekphrastically. I'm not very ekphrastic usually. I'd say, just saying for myself, it's a hell of a poem.
Nancy's question ended with asking you if you could talk about midrash as an interpretation of text.
I snuck up on midrash. I kind of didn't know quite what it was. Midrash is done when I started. Midrash is done by people who are trained, who are readers of texts, and it's done generally by the Orthodox Jewish rabbis. So doing it as a female, non-rabbinical person is a little bit of a jump. It is a way of asking questions of a text that open new doors. It's a way, basically, the way we would say, thinking in poetry, thinking through material.
So, if I can help with that, I have the whole. I can't point it to you. I have the whole midrash rabbah. Word midrash means reading. That's all it means, and the what's collected as famously as midrash is just the conversations people had, rabbis had, or anybody else. Wasn't only rabbis, although mostly rabbis, about the text. So that every time you talk about a canonical text at all in conversation, you're doing midrash.
But it's also interpreting what's called sacred text. And the interest for me about it is that it opens the text to constant questioning. There's no final interpretation of text. This differs, well, there's always debate in philosophy and religion, but it connects for me with an attitude toward both finality and orthodoxy, which would be that I'm resisting both of them.
Well, we have a rabbi here, Rabbi Gus Buchdahl, got a blue sweater on, who, if he wants to make a comment on what a midrash is, it would be welcome.
He'd have to unmute himself.
That's right. Midrash is the rabbinic imagination applied to the text.
That's right.
Whereas, and it's open. As the Bible may be canonized, but Midrash isn't. So it is a perpetual process, and it's not limited to rabbis, and it's not limited to orthodoxy. It is, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of feeling, looking at the text and then imagining, the spaces between the words and the spaces between the stories. Hope that helps.
It does.
It does, thanks.
Okay. Rachel, I at one point I started writing down colors in your work. And there were pinks and magentas and beiges and I know, and more. And I know you're a visual artist, you're a collagist. But I wonder if you could talk about the presence of color in the textual works.
Not with total comprehension of what I do. That is to say, collage to me is about juxtaposition and edges, which is very familiar to all of us who are in poetry, since we all talk about jump cuts and juxtapositions and so on, that's a familiar. And what happens when one does visual work, coming from both doing criticism and poetry, is that you're free again to see how crazy choices are that you make. Speak of that pen. That is, you want to put things together that look interesting for reasons that you don't entirely comprehend. That's all. And I can't, there's no deliberate Ramboian, sonnet of colors or anything like that. And I don't have a color coding the way Wallace Stevens does, where you can sort of code out his colors. But there are, especially in that poem where I dedicated it to you for this reading, there are a lot of colors. That's all.
Thank you.
Barrett Watton has a question.
You can unmute yourself, Barrett.
So I'm interested in this midrashic theme, and I notice we have a Gottlieb, a Mandel, and a Blau. And then I'm thinking about interpretation and the hermeneutical tradition, and so how midrashic reading and hermeneutical interpretation would be different. And one of the places I'm thinking about there is, what do you do interpretively with the pretty clear use of elision or gap in the work of all three of you? Non sequitur, that which is left out, that which is bridged over, that which can't be said, that which isn't reducible to the positive. And I think in every case, the poetry does sort of have a place of interrogation of that thing which isn't said. So that's over to you. In other words, we heard a lot about the material text and midrash, right? You've got an inscription, and the inscription gets muttered over and expanded and reprocessed. What about what isn't said? What about the blank spaces?
I think I would have to defer to an actual person who knew what he or she was talking about for a description of the gaps and things in religious texts. I mean, when you think about religion in many ways as an institution of practice, an institution of understanding or of formalizing understanding, wants to cover over the gaps and jump over them and pretend they didn't exist, like even a textual gap of something where you don't have the exact text, but you do little inferences, or you do readings, or you make theology up and stuff it in the gaps. I don't think that the hermeneutic tradition wants to do that. I don't know, Barry, you can probably talk to that better than I can, and I wish you would on some level.
Well, here's an example, and I'll just toss it out there, because Romanticism came up a couple places, I think maybe in Michael's work. Wordsworth is crossing the Alps, and he's going through the pass. And he doesn't really quite know when it is that he's actually crossed the Alps. And once he gets past it, he realizes he's past the point where he's crossed the Alps. And so this cross at the moment where he crossed the Alps is unrepresentable, ineffable, and then points to something that is really significant and profound, which is that he couldn't actually state when it is he achieved this thing, where he'd done this thing crossing the Alps. And then from there you get to the evermore about to be of some kind of futurity. I think that is indicated by this inability to say specifically, and yet to have transited past this particular point. And so you could point to a lot of examples in Romanticism of the thing that isn't there is actually leading on to the future, as a kind of futurity in that ineffable or unsayable. And
it's an interesting interpretation of crossing the Alps, actually. But the thing that to me strikes a chord with the Wordsworth is that he sees actual evidence from nature. That is, he suddenly sees that the flow of water is going in the other direction from what it was before. And then he knows he's crossed the Alps. So he is doing some sort of reading of that moment. In a way, he's almost, I agree with you that the ineffable gap, I think, is what poets are constantly trying to talk their way through. I don't know, because it's both the most tempting thing,
if I can,
the most scary. But I just wanted to mention that he does see, and he could, if he wanted to, track back and walk back to see the point at which he actually saw the water. Actually, the watershed was evident. That's all.
Has that quality of I know it in retrospect. Knowledge occurs as something retrospective, which is clearly inherent in that whole tradition. And as far as this business of not knowing where you are, you could say that Coleridge's whole life and career was based on not knowing where he was. But I don't think this has a much to do with Midrash, which is not about the ineffable. It's about the openness of a text in the sense of anything, in the sense that no matter what it is that's human, it admits to conversation, and the conversation is not finalizing. Midrash is not even thought of as writing. It's thought of as it's thought of as oral. It's the oral tradition, even though in fact it's been recorded for you to read.
Yeah, it's kind of gloss. You're constantly glossing and trying to figure out what it is that you're thinking, and what it is also, by the way, that a past of people has thought, and how you respond to that past of other people's thinking.
Sure.
A comment was made in the chat about also in looking at that history or any text, the gaps, and filling in the gaps. And then the comment was, like women, left out of various accounts.
Don't get me started already.
Okay.
So Barry, I have actually, I didn't read it. One of the poems, more direct Wordsworth pointer. There's a line that says, "The problem is not the emotion or the recollecting, it's the tranquility." I thought your question was very decisive. What I heard you say was, what are we saying? What do we want to talk about when we talk about the gaps? Right? I think that's where your comment started.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. All three of us have built that into our work. And I know I think about what I'm leaving out and breaks and the degree to which this is bricolage or collage, in which, as some of us have said, all of the work that we can point back to the beginning of the 20th century is a focus on what we're deciding to leave out, because that impulse to collage and bricolage was the foundational one for almost all art, you could say, starting about 120 years ago.
Well, that makes
And
great.
if we, and if you say, and if we can, if that is indeed something that's arguable, then your question is very telling. Then why are we cutting things up and leaving space between them, right? But what is in that space? Why, right? I think that's what you're asking. Yeah?
Well,
That's how I heard your question.
There's what we leave out knowingly, and there's what we leave out unknowingly, and each of them has a voice in the text. But for sure, it's where's the locus classicus for this? There's the beginning of 3 poems by John Ashbery. I thought I would put it all in. Then I thought, no, it would be better if I'm not quoting. If I left it
Yeah.
If I were to take it out, right?
It's the gap between the two that's interesting. Let's see. Am I heard? I think I am. Yeah. So, Rachel, your read on Wordsworth is absolutely right, and that goes directly to the Angelus Novus. That is, passing through the having crossed the Alps is like the history piling up at the feet. It's really, you're being blown as you cross the Alps. You're actually being blown by the wind of paradise backwards, and then you look back and you say, "Oh, I crossed the Alps." But at the moment of crossing, that's another matter. But the example that I'm really taken with is Coleridge in his notebooks. He's on a boat traveling through the Straits of Gibraltar, and I was just there actually. So in the Straits of Gibraltar, looking across it, and I thought about Coleridge, and he's going in one direction. I don't know which way. And he said, "This side is Africa, and that side is Europe." He's on this boat, and it's like that's the point. It's like neither, It's and not only that, the two coasts look almost identical. You can't really. What is the name Europe supplied to that coast, and the name Africa supplied to the other one?
I think it's interesting about the recognition of Africa, and I'd love to know what was inside the concept or the word Africa for Coleridge at that point, because I was going to say before that. Speaking of gaps, we all know that in the past 40, 50 years, we've gone through the knowledge of our own gaps as certain kind of person and trying to fill those gaps and understand what the gaps were. Another form of gap, not one that should be necessarily valued by people who are educated. But, it's interesting. I mean, I think of this lime tree bower, my prison, where he constructs a whole walk for himself, even though he's laid up with a broken ankle or something, or with some sort of I can't walk this walk that Wordsworth is walking with everybody. And it's too long, too complicated. And he makes a whole amazing, absolutely astonishing poem for me of that gap by filling the gap with poetry. Anyway, we should, unless I was going to ask Barry what he wants to say about hermeneutics, I think we should maybe pass to another set of questions. If anybody has, or maybe nobody, who knows?
I just put a link in the chat to that Paul Klee image of the Angelus Novus. And the poem by Coleridge is "This lime tree bower, my prison." Wordsworth is not there, but Charles Lamb is. Okay, sorry. I'm not so up on the romantics. I'm just like a long time ago. Haven't taught them in a while. Anyway, should I sit here and read the whole poem to you? No, you should just get the book and look at it, because I really go through the different ways that you can interpret literally. I mean, from my point of view,
that passage of Benjamin. And it's a pretty scary poem to me.
Are there new questions from anyone out there? I'd like to say, or comments on what's been said?
Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
This is great.
One person in the chat said, let's keep doing it.
Yeah.
We'll do it again
Together
sometime.
more frequently.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming, and I hope
you,
to
Charles.
see you all soon.
Are we shutting it down? Bye, y'all.
Yeah, we're going to shut it down.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Mike, Rachel, thanks again.